Hello, Piro here. I'm going to make another video on violence, one because I want to talk about this more, and another because people asked me since it was so noisy in that last one. And there's an HVAC machine over here that might be kind of loud. The thing is, I tune that sort of stuff out myself. I didn't even notice there was the truck backing up until I listened to the video after I'd uploaded it. I know that kind of bothers some people. I'm not apologizing because I'm not going to change. I will make videos opportunistically. It's like I'm thinking right now and I have time on my computer right now and I'm going to record the idea. And whatever's going on, sort of that's what's going on. But I don't want to be, thoughtless of people's sensitivities, and if somebody's going to say, hey, I like these ideas, but I couldn't concentrate because of the noise, I'm happy to try to make another video. I may or may not cover all the ideas because, I haven't really prepared it. This stuff is a bit improvisational to me. I don't like to prepare too much. If I'm going to slip up or there's a difficult part, I'd rather maybe stumble a little and have people see the idea in its more raw form anyway. But, what I was trying to say is first of all, I think, to simplify, everybody's trying to come up with a pacifist philosophy. Yes, there are belligerent philosophies, but even those these days usually use peace as an ideal, and they tell you why you have to carry the big stick in order to get peace. They still use peace as their ideal. Now, pacifists have simply said there is no real reason for violence. It's better to turn the other cheek and this kind of thing. So that's one group. But a much larger group, of course, is admitting that, well, there's certain situations where I would be violent or even advocate violence or even morally think that it was right to be violent, to defend a child that's being attacked or something. Yeah, you go be violent in that situation. And this is sort of the gotcha. A lot of us are not thinking about this because we don't want to have a philosophy that says, yeah, you can be violent in certain situations. And the reason is that we know that gives an avenue for excuses. For those that just want to be violent, we're like telling them, don't be violent, but okay, here's how you can be violent. And we're giving them a little formula that they can use to make up excuses for being violent. So one of my points is that screw them and screw that. Let's talk about violence and philosophy from the point of view of people that don't want to be violent. We can talk about how to judge the reasons people give for being violent and when we want to believe them or what standards we want to hold them to as a separate thing. Because the danger otherwise is that we're just going to avoid the question. We're going to pretend like we could create a pacifist philosophy, and then in some situations we just don't use that philosophy. We use this other one because we're busy defending ourselves. And exceptional philosophies are not as strong, they're not as robust as a philosophy that, gradually goes to a point where, yeah, maybe there will have to be some conflict. And in my relativism, I don't think a violent act can be moral, and the point is because I think that, morality happens in these in echelons and spheres around us, things we identify with. When we identify as part of a group, the morality question is how are we to treat the members of that group. So there is really even a personal morality about yourself. That is, how should you treat yourself? You should treat yourself with respect and try to take care of your body and things like this. And then there's, in your familial group, how should you treat the members of your family, and so on and so forth. With whatever community or nation that you identify with, how should you guys all treat each other, and how should you treat others, and also how should you treat people that violate the rules that you think are appropriate for that group. And so given that, a violent act is going to violate somebody's morality always, somebody's that's being aggressed upon. But you still might have to do it. So I don't think that a violent act is ever moral, but it's not always immoral either, because basically it's possible to create conflict situations where that whole concept of morality and immorality breaks down and you really have raw questions of survival. So, this is sort of my point in that, is that, to try to get people to say how they address, violence in their philosophy, what explains the violence, sort of what limits are there to that, I do think the most enlightened sphere, at the broadest level, you always find that probably the pacifists are correct, but that there's always a nonviolent way to act, and if so, then that's always the right way to act, even if it costs you something personally. But I believe that all our morality comes from survival issues, survival issues of these groups within which we're asking moral questions. And so when the morality system breaks down, what you have still is survival mathematics, and that you have to respect and understand. And even if there's a higher moral thing of being nonviolent in a situation that's provocative of violence, you can't always expect that. People do have a right to survive, and therefore to fight for their survival if that's really what it takes. And it's a scary truth. I don't want to give any license to violent people. I don't want to support belligerent philosophies. But I think what we need is philosophies that are pacifist in spirit, or peaceful at least, and that still explain this issue of why some things do come to violence. And I think with such a philosophy, then, we will identify those areas and we'll be much better at keeping the peace. If we recognize what really does cause conflict, if we realize the situations where really we have to say, I understand somebody's reacting violently to this threat to their survival, then we can put all our heads together on the diplomacy for those situations. We can put all our heads together on, creating governmental and shared infrastructures that avoid those conflicts so that everybody's survival is working out, and create situations where, even though we know some situations may, legitimately involve violence, that we can keep those situations out of our own experience and live in a sphere where, no, there is no good reason to be violent. And if you look at that, the world, there's progress in the world. We're getting closer to states like that. We're in a very violent world now, but we're more and more at least able to see how, a lot of that violence is just chosen. Those people are not really forced in. There isn't a real resource. They're having a war that is supposedly about a resource conflict, and there really isn't a resource conflict, or there's a resource mismanagement that's leading to the conflict, and we could just solve the infrastructural issue of the mismanagement. And I think these solutions will become clear, as we handle violence in our philosophies, conscientiously and consciously. So that's what I was trying to get at, and to ask you guys both to think about violence, especially people with nice peaceful philosophies, to think about how violence plays in, to think about whether you've demonized violence or you're just minimizing violence, how are you treating violence, and also just to open up, this topic. And in general, I will say, sort of seems like a tangent, but it's related, that, I've been presenting this philosophy, this foundational philosophy of relativistic skepticism, but it's not my whole philosophy. I have a wide range of philosophy, and I want to move on to, sort of some of the higher levels of abstractions that are still important to me, a philosophy of how to live well, philosophy of art. Philosophy of art, this is a personal philosophy. It's important to us all. What kinds of art would you make or enjoy? And that's not something that's going to be universal, but it can be built on relativistic skepticism, and then you have your own personal philosophy, and then we can talk about these things. How should we live a good life? How do you enjoy, your life? And other higher order philosophies, like political philosophies, which are going to rely on how we handle things like violence. And the purpose of relativistic skepticism in that is just to give us a basis for our claims about knowledge in these other higher levels. And when we have conflicting knowledge, how are we going to resolve? How are we going to compare these and decide which one to go with in those cases where we really do need, to come to a consensus? So I hope that was less noisy for you, those of you who are noise sensitive. And I apologize in advance for the future times I will have bad sound or bad whatever in my videos. But, so, yeah. Cheers.